Namaste and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, a show about India's foreign policy, strategy, its major partnerships, how it goes about shaping the emerging world order. It's about India's diplomatic stature, how it is rising around the world, and the ways in which the rest of the world is appreciating India's role in transforming the international system. Viewers, this time we are looking at a country that's really exceptional by itself and also in terms of its partnership with India. This is Japan. Japan, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has called it a perfect partner for India. And words actually do not suffice to explain how important Japan is for India's geostrategy, for its economy, and in terms of people to people and cultural relations as well. And to take you through this episode on the Japan-India Special Strategic and Global Partnership, I am privileged to introduce you to none other than Ambassador Sujan Chinoy. Ambassador Sujan Chinoy served as India's ambassador to Japan for 3 years and is presently Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, a major strategic affairs think tank in India. Ambassador Chinoy, welcome to Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Ambassador Chinoy, when it comes to Japan, I mean, you have been there and everyone says it's special, and especially so for India. Your opening thoughts on what is it that makes Japan stand out? I mean, the 21st century, arguably, the order in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, and even world order depends very much on Japan. It's the third largest economy in the world, and it continues to be a major technology hub, entrepreneurship, important cultural influence in Asia and beyond. So Japan, I mean, You've lived there and you've seen it from the horse's mouth. We want to know, audience wants to know, what is it that makes Japan so exceptional?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me and for getting me to speak about Japan, my favorite country. I first went there as an exchange student when I was in university in the 1970s, and when I reached the end of my career in the Foreign Service, I found myself as ambassador to Japan. So that was like the crowning glory on a long association of 45 years with Japan. Japan is even today the world's second largest developed economy and the third largest, as you said, in absolute terms. It has enormous resources, financial and technological. You're aware that they have roughly 8 trillion US dollars worth of savings. And Japan is a known superpower in terms of science and technology, and particularly innovation. In other words, as Prime Minister Modi has said, there is perhaps no other country that contributes as much to the realization of India's economic ambitions and aspirations as does Japan. It is a very major partner for us.
And Ambassador, talking of Prime Minister Modi, I mean, he's been really driving this relationship to another level, right? I mean, we used to have a strategic partnership with Japan before, but now we've added many more adjectives and it's become a much bigger thing. And clearly from Gujarat, when he was Chief Minister, and now when he's Prime Minister, he has really believed in Japan and made Japan believe in India, right? And that's been an important cementing factor in making this such a successful relationship.
But that's very true. I think the Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, has for very long looked at Japan as a model for development in India. And particularly in the state of Gujarat, there has been an effort to reach out to Japan. Gujarat has one of the strongest outreach programs vis-a-vis Japan. And therefore, Gujarat is linked in multiple ways. For instance, with the Hyogo prefecture, there is a sister state relationship. The pinnacle of that partnership, in fact, is the first ever Zen Garden that has been set up last year in Ahmedabad. And I am, in fact, the honorary patron of the Indo-Japan Friendship Association that worked in tandem with the Ahmedabad Management Association to create that garden.
And Ambassador, I mean, talking of Zen Garden, it also reminds me that Prime Minister said publicly that there was a time when there were no golf courses in Gujarat. And then because the Japanese business community wanted to woo them and come to Ahmedabad and Baroda in a big way, they built the golf courses, and the Japanese love it there. And you know, whoever has been to Gujarat, you see so many Japanese around. It really is like a second home for them. And attracting the Japanese to India. That has been, I think, a big transformative factor in driving this relationship.
Well, that's true, and I think much of that credit must go to the Prime Minister of India, for he has in fact long regarded Japan as integral to the state's development, and Gujarat, being an entrepreneurial state, has a natural fit with Japan, and we have seen how several clusters have been created, not just in Ahmedabad but also in and around Mehsana. There is an automotive cluster now coming up at Sanand. So therefore you're right, you will see the Japanese in various parts of Gujarat investing, trading, doing business, and all of this makes for a formidable partnership between Gujarat and Japan.
And now it's all India, Ambassador, clearly, because I mean, I was looking at the statistics, something like 7% of all the investment India has gotten since the turn of the millennium comes from just one country, that is Japan. I mean, they really, and whenever they have given targets, Shinzo Abe administration set some targets, now Fumio Kishida has set some targets. Every time they set a target for 5 years and this is how much we are going to invest, they actually put the money where the mouth is, right? I mean, they really mean it. Sometimes countries make bombastic announcements about this much foreign investment and all that, but it doesn't materialize eventually. But Japan, when they say it, they mean it.
That's true. The Japanese are very meticulous. They are normally a little slower in terms of committing themselves, because they do their due diligence very, very carefully, but once they commit themselves to a certain partnership, there is no looking back. And you're right in pointing out the very large quantum of investment in India. Of the $36.2 billion worth of investments that has come in from Japan cumulatively since the year 2000, a very large part of that in fact has come in into the infrastructure space, and you see this reflected in the Delhi Metro, for instance. There is the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, the Bangalore-Chennai Industrial Corridor, the dedicated freight corridor, and numerous other projects. We have national highways, for instance, in the northeast, National Highway 40, 50, 1 and National Highway 54, National Highway 208. These are all national highways in the northeast being built with Japanese assistance. The Japanese are present in every major infrastructure project in India today.
It's just amazing. I mean, China may be bigger as an economy and may have overtaken Japan, but look at the difference. I mean, China has not invested in India as much as we would have liked them initially. And now, of course, there are geopolitical tensions and problems. But on the other hand, with Japan, there has never been any kind of a conflict of interest, and it looks like there's a perfect synergy. Viewers, I'd like you to hear a special message from the current Indian ambassador to Japan, Sanjay Verma, and then take the discussion forward. Let's hear him.
Our spatial, strategic and global partnership has all the domains of functional and strategic cooperation covered therein. This could be easily seen reflected not only in our bilateral partnership but also in our commitment to Quad and IPEF. All these ride on the basic construct of Indo-Pacific as well as Indian and Pacific Oceans Initiative. Amongst few of the recent initiatives that the two countries have undertaken to work together include increasing industrial competitiveness, synergizing the two innovation ecosystems, using highly skilled manpower from India to work with Japanese companies in Japan, in India, and of course worldwide, to name just a few. Defense technology and equipment cooperation is also strengthening and has bright future, auguring well with our spatial, strategic and global partnership. Managing supply chain disruptions is an important aspect of our bilateral and multilateral connect. In order to spread common good, India and Japan are committed to undertake joint projects in third countries. If I do a bit of future gazing, in medium term, the core issue would remain strengthening our geostrategic relations, which will have several subdomains to be worked upon. Our bilateral partnership has been nurtured by generations of Indian and Japanese citizens. This now needs to be taken to the youth of the two countries by involving them in various exchanges. Exchanges in science and technology and innovation would remain one of the key pillars of our bilateral partnership. Given the research capacities of our two countries, climate change mitigation would remain at the forefront of our bilateral, regional and global cooperation. With increasing complexities of cyberspace and digital domain, both India and Japan will need to work together more intensely in order to provide safer and secure digital environment, not only for the people of our two countries, but to give out global products which could be used by the citizens of the world. Reforms of international organizations, including the United Nations Security Council, is a goal towards which both the countries have been working for some time and will continue to do so.
So, viewers, Ambassador Verma has laid out a full range of priorities in the current Japan-India special strategic and global partnership. Ambassador Chinoy, one point I want to take off from what Ambassador Verma just said is about Japan and India cooperating in third countries. Now, this is of course probably one reason why we call it a global strategic partnership as opposed to just a strategic partnership. And we know Japan and India jointly doing works in Myanmar, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, and in Africa, and perhaps across the Indo-Pacific as well, as part of many joint initiatives. So your thoughts on this kind of synergy? I mean, Japanese finance, Japanese technical abilities and Indian manpower, it seems like a perfect fit, and we are doing some extraordinary things and making a difference for the lives of ordinary people in less developed countries. And it looks like Japan favors India as its vehicle to be able to implement many of its own foreign developmental assistance projects and policies. So you've worked with Japan very closely to make this happen. So tell our audiences how this works and why, and how do the two of us coordinate, and how do we approach third countries, and why do they welcome us, and how all of this is producing this virtuous cycle?
Well, I think you're right in describing it as a virtuous cycle, a virtuous partnership, because there is great trust in what Japan does, and there is equally great trust in what India does. For our intentions are to develop the region, to ensure that the region develops as a whole. So these are pro bono intentions which are well recognized. There is none of that predatory developmental finance involved. There is no strategic sort of underlying scheme to what we do. It is not an extractive relationship that we seek. And so given this convergence between the way we and Japan look at the region, there is great scope for us to work together. Now, Japan, as you rightly said, has enormous financial resources. It has the best technologies in the world. India, on the other hand, has excellent talent, human resources, and the manpower required to work together in the region. There are parts of Asia that we know better. There are parts of Asia that Japan knows better. When it comes to Japan's comfort level, hitherto they were quite sort of comfortable working in Southeast Asia, in the Far East. They were not very familiar with South Asia, and certainly not very familiar with Africa. So therefore we can bring in that experience of having dealt with the larger South Asian region. We are also familiar, given our civilizational ties, with Southeast Asia. So there's an overlap there. And when it comes to Africa, who better than India?
Right.
And the Japanese have also realized that it is much easier to be based out of India and then to also have Pan-African operations. National Panasonic, for instance, has shifted their African operations to India.
Wow.
And many more would benefit from doing the same. It's much cheaper. We have the right kind of connect in Africa. Though I must also add, hasten to add, that the models are slightly different. Sometimes the points of connect in Africa are also different. The Japanese traditionally would work, for instance, in countries that are medium income. India traditionally goes in for those countries in Africa that require lots of assistance, like lines of credit and such like. But fundamentally, both Japan and India are happy to work according to the priorities of the African countries, which is different from some of the competing models that are
exploit the so-called Beijing
available.
consensus
That's
and all
right.
or the Washington. So, but Ambassador, I just want to also to you to also reflect on the infrastructure bit. You mentioned the amazing infrastructure growth in India being enabled and facilitated by Japan, but across the Indo-Pacific also we have committed, and Prime Minister's initiative of a coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. Japan is a major partner for it, and Japanese bring higher standards and quality. In everyone's mind, when you put China and Japan, the first contrast is Japan is higher quality, is most trustworthy, and so that in that sense, there is a clear value add when Japan comes into the picture. Probably for recipient countries also, they know that this is going to be a lot superior and will last longer and will provide more long-term socioeconomic benefits to their population than if it were, say, the Chinese coming in through their Belt and Road Initiative.
Japan, as you know, has some of the best experience anywhere in the world on disaster relief, disaster management, and therefore it's very natural that we should look to Japan as our key partner when we speak of a coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure. And we must also keep in mind that while Japanese technology and Japanese infrastructure is of very high standards, it's also commensurately a little more expensive. And therefore, this is where India comes in. If Japan and India work together, it is a way of maintaining very high standards, the while also lowering costs, because India brings that to the table as well. We have very good talent available in India, and our operating models are somewhat cheaper, I should say, less expensive compared to the Japanese model. And so the region also recognizes this, and I think we can work together in that regard.
And Ambassador, when we talk about Japan, it's also becoming more assertive and influential in the region geopolitically, and has declared an intent to have a bigger role to play in security sphere. And on this matter, I'd like the audiences to hear from Professor Purnendra Jain, who is at the University of Adelaide in Australia, an eminent Japanologist, and who was awarded the Japan's highest civilian honor, the Order of the Rising Sun, and resume this discussion on this newfound activism, foreign policy and security activism of Japan, and how that's also helping India. Let's hear about this transformation, how this has happened, from Professor Purnendra Jain.
With China's wealth came its military muscle flexing around the region and around Japanese territories. While incremental change occurred throughout, marked shifts in foreign policy came during Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's administration from 2012. Japan, for the first time, established a National Security Council and a national security strategy. While still the largest trading partner, China is now perceived as a threat in Japan. To deal with China, Tokyo has adopted new strategies beyond its solid US alliance. Japan has formed security and economic networks with like-minded nations, including India. It advanced the notion of a free and open Indo-Pacific and has been a key protagonist of the Quad grouping. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has clearly set out the course of Japan's foreign policy in his keynote speech at the Shangri-La Dialogue, while maintaining Japan's pacifist stance and aspiring for a world without nuclear arms. Kishida has stated that Japan will stand up to any challenges that it confronts. Tokyo has signaled its unwillingness to tolerate any change in the status quo by force, including that of Taiwan. Tokyo is willing to break from its past taboos like defense spending beyond 1% of GDP and is ready to upgrade its defense capabilities. In the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Japan feels ever more challenged and more threatened than before. Kishida's worry is that Ukraine today may be East Asia tomorrow. In the months and years to come, we will see many critical shifts in its foreign and defense policy while Japan adhering to its peace constitution.
So viewers, Professor Purnendra Jain talking about critical shifts in Japanese foreign policy. The US alliance, of course, is the pillar on which Japan has built itself and become a major global economic powerhouse. And the US alliance remains a bedrock of Japanese foreign policy. But Professor Jain was also talking about the shift towards networks. Because earlier it was like a hub and spokes model where the US was in the middle and Japan and Australia and all the other allies used to rotate around the US dictated outcomes in the region. But now increasingly Japan is moving towards a network based model away from hub and spokes where the US remains, but also many other regional partners are becoming important. And Ambassador Chenoy, this point about Japan becoming more assertive. Professor Jain was talking about Taiwan, and they're also more active with the defense cooperation with Southeast, with ASEAN countries, in the Pacific Island nations. You have served as ambassador to in one of the Pacific Island nations as well. That region, that whole Western Pacific, Indo-Pacific as a whole, it looks like Japan is willing to step up and break free of a lot of the old constraints after the post-World War II settlement and the Pacific Constitution. So in that sense, Japan is a country to look out for, right? Because it's not quiet or docile anymore as it used to be in the past. And the more assertive Japan seems to be good news, because we would like a rebalancing of power in the region, as our External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar often refers to. And a more proactive Japan is welcome for us.
Well, you're right. But let me begin by saying that Japan is still a country that is deeply wedded to its pacifist constitution. Though the fact remains that Article 9 of the Constitution has been discussed for very long in terms of what it entails for the self-defense forces, their position in the defense firmament of Japan. What we have to keep in mind is that whereas the US-Japan strategic and security partnership remains firmly intact, and the US is deeply committed to Article 5 of the Security Treaty, Japan is also looking for ways and means to bolster its security. There was a brief period during the Trump presidency when Japan may have felt a bit of pressure and of abandonment, though that I think is far-fetched. But there are three main concerns that Japan has. The first, for instance, is the rise of China, its militarism, its aggression, its assertive behavior in the East China Sea, not just the South China Sea. Its very frequent sort of forays in and around the Senkakus, where Japan has had to mount roughly 1,000 sorties, say for instance in 2021. Then there is the business of Chinese ships, routinely submarines as well, passing through the Tsushima Strait and the Tsugaru Strait without so much as a by your leave. Normally submarines are required to surface if they are passing through narrow straits. In this case, the Chinese do it with a fair bit of abandon without necessarily catering to Japanese sensitivities. More recently, there is also the question of relations with Russia. These fears have been heightened in light of the war in Ukraine, but also because Japan has a long-standing and festering dispute with Russia over the northern islands. And therefore, to add to this sort of very, very potent mix, there is also the threat from North Korea, which is now preparing for its 7th nuclear test. So given this kind of a situation, I would say the past decade has seen a great deal of flux and change in the way Japan is looking at its own defense. It has given great importance to collective defense. There is also a great deal of emphasis now being given to reciprocal access arrangements. It has concluded one with India.
As well.
It has also concluded one with Australia. And under, I would say, US encouragement, there is effort being made to shore up the weak link in the security paradigms in Northeast Asia. And that, by that I'm referring to relations between Japan and South Korea.
Yeah.
And under the new president, in fact, there is reason to believe that Japan and South Korea will have better relations. And quite recently, the defense ministers of the three countries have actually engaged in a trilateral.
Japan, South Korea, US.
And the US,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
If the bilateral relationship between Japan and South Korea is stable, there is a much better sort of echo effect in terms of the broader geopolitical dimensions to major power contestation in that part of the world. So Japan is looking at all this in a very broad sort of manner, and India is also seen as a very major power that bolsters peace, stability and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific.
Ambassador, last word on China, Japan. I mean, there is a lot of economic interdependence, and there's no doubt about the volume of trade they do, and investment is tremendous. That cannot be denied. But on the security side, it's clear whose side Japan is on. Japan wants a balance of power. How does it manage this contradiction? I mean, some people call it hot economics, cold politics between Japan and China. And could Japan be coerced using the weaponizing of interdependence by China not to become more assertive? But I don't think Japan has really fallen for any such pressure or indications from the Chinese side. So we can expect Japan to stay this line.
Well, it's a complex relationship that they have. In the late 70s, after the United States patched up with China and forged a strategic partnership, Japan also followed the United States in terms of investing deeply in the Chinese economy. And over the last several decades, it is a fact that most Japanese supply chains emanate out of China. And therefore, anything that happens to that economic partnership has deep implications for Japan's prosperity and well-being. This having been said, Japan has been for the last several years pursuing a China plus policy
to diversify
and to also ensure that there isn't such a great dependence on supply chains emanating out of China. But this is easier said than done. The decoupling part is something that has been prioritized. Japan allocated $2.2 billion for that purpose. Some of that is also to take supply chains out to third countries like India. But we have to make sure that we create the right kind of policy docking points, receptacles, in order to invite and attract the Japanese investments that seek that kind of risk mitigation by going out to places other than China.
Absolutely.
But that's a little easier said than done.
Absolutely.
But there is coercion involved. I must add this point quickly. We saw that in 2010 when there was an incident at sea between a Japanese naval vessel and a Chinese fishing boat. It ended up with China in fact turning off the spigot with regard to rare earths, which was so
Critical
fundamental
minerals,
to Japan's electronics industry.
So viewers, that's all we have in this episode. Do think about the Japan-India partnership and all its dimensions that we have covered today. I want to especially thank Ambassador Sujan Chinoy for sparing time. Thank you, sir. You enlightened the audience so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Chaulia, for inviting me.
It's such a pleasure. So I'll see you again next time, viewers, and until then, keep thinking about India's key partnerships and how it's changing the world. Take care.